Hello, everyone, and welcome to the final session of day 2 of the 6G Symposium, the problem of universal access, who needs to act? Now, universal access as a concept is not new. In fact, we have universal service funds since the very early days of telecoms. What we're seeing now, though, is as nations and regions start to build out their visions for 6G, then it appears that governments have suddenly realized the significance of being connected to their citizenry and to their economics. So this is something which is being built into some of the key value indicators, for example, in the European Union's vision. And potentially, who knows, maybe we're actually on the edge of being able to deliver not just universal service, but universal access. I mean, this really isn't a technology problem in itself. I mean, if money were no object, then we'd have had the world covered by cell towers years ago. So yes, we do have people with a technology background here, but we have much more than that as well. My name's Alex Lawrence. I'm the managing editor of 6G World. For those of you that were expecting to have moderator Ernest Worthman here, I'll just say I'm keeping his seat warm. He has been delayed. So for those of you that suddenly discover me, maybe as we go through this, turning into an older American gentleman, that would be why. Now, we've got a fantastic group of people here to talk to us about this. What I'm going to do is get each of them to introduce themselves in turn and give you a few minutes of their background and understanding what universal access means to them. And then we'll dive in with a bit more of a discussion, trying to pull together some of these different issues and elements. There is a Q&A button. Please do use the Q&A to send us in questions and talking points, and we'll do our best to address them in the time available. Now, it just remains for me to introduce our panelists, which Bernadette Lewis, the head of the Commonwealth Telecoms Organization, Bert Claessens from ACM and BEREC, the regulator, Eleanor Sarpong from the Web Foundation and the Alliance for Affordable Internet, and Glenn Katz from Telesat. Now, just for the sake of argument, Bernadette, can I start with you perhaps and get you the chance to introduce yourself and where you're coming from on this? Oh, you're muted still.
Yes, good afternoon. Thank you, Alex. And I count it a privilege to be part of this panel. I was appointed as the Secretary General of the Commonwealth Telecommunications Organization in July 2020. It's not the most auspicious time to join any organization because, of course, everything is in lockdown and so on. And I've only last week actually physically met my staff. Nevertheless, and prior to that, I was the Secretary General of the Caribbean Telecommunications Union, and the whole issue of universal access has been of concern to me, both in my prior position and in this also. And I like to think of it from the point of view that it is a right. Article 19 of the United Nations International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights states, everyone shall have the right to freedom of expression. This right shall include freedom to seek, receive, and impart information and ideas of all kinds, regardless of frontiers, either orally or in writing or in print, in the form of art or through any other media of his choice. And I think this statement really speaks to the right of every individual to communicate. And in this regard, it is incumbent on governments to ensure that the means for communication are available to all. So being connected connectivity to information systems and networks is a starting point for enabling the enjoyment of that right to communicate. And it represents a fundamental aspect of digital democracy. And therefore, universal access has been a policy goal for many governments for many decades. And whether it was POTS, plain old telephone service, or mobile phone service, or broadband, I think governments across the world recognize that affordable access to these technologies was essential for building inclusive society. So I take the stand that it is a right, and therefore it is incumbent on the powers that be that they put the mechanisms in place that will enable citizens of every country to enjoy that right to communicate. Thank you. I'll hand it back over to Alex and for my colleagues.
Fantastic. Thanks, Bernadette. Well, that's starting with a bang, definitely. So now that we've set out that this is a right, I'm going to ask Bert to respond to this from the regulatory point of view. Bernadette mentions, for example, some mechanisms and so on. Would you be working towards those kinds of mechanisms?
Oh yes, and I though she started strongly, I might disappoint you if I won't argue with her, because I think I agree with her on the point. Initially, I was a bit surprised that 6G was related to universal access, because 6G is a technology yet to come, and in universal access, is that actually the level you want to that people need, right? Because I think it goes beyond the right to speak. It is the right to fully participate in digital environment. And in telecommunication, we often talk about the digital divide, and the digital divide has two sides. One is connectivity, and the other one is digital skills. And I must say that I feel humbled in this group that you know, you have experience in countries that are underserved with respect to connectivity. My house has 2 high-speed connections, fixed lines, and I can choose between 3 mobile operators that offer 4 or 5G. That's not everywhere.
Right.
So when we talk about digital divide, I would choose a safer side and discuss the digital skills, because you have bigger issues to solve. At the same time, I must say that my colleagues of PTS, my Swedish colleagues, they do capacity building in Africa, and they were surprised to see the similarities in the challenges they have in connecting the absolute northern parts of Sweden, similar to the challenges in Africa. So even Europe is quite diverse. So I wonder if 6G is required for speech, but if 6G will become the new standard, it should be everywhere. And just like I think in 5G, there is an obligation to connect like almost 100% of the area, 100% of the people. It's an obligation, and it's up to the operators to solve that. First of all, with a business case. And the business case of 6G needs to be developed. 6G is going to connect everything and everyone. And I've been also quite a bit in geospatial circles. And I've seen people in the sensing technology and in the geospatial and artificial intelligence. That industry seems to be ready for it. They produce a vast amount of data that needs 6G. And I think once all the sensors will be connected, the people will also be connected. And of course, for the remaining people in the remaining villages remotely located, we need to find something for that. And I don't know how long you will let me go on talking, but of course, we need to find ways to connect people.
Thanks, Bert. That's a really useful point, and actually that sort of segues neatly into getting Glenn to introduce himself and some of his points. As we're talking about universal coverage, then clearly that seems to be a role where Telesat has an opportunity to play, and it would be great to understand how you see the world of satellites and non-terrestrial networks tying in with future networks in order to be able to deliver this.
Great, thank you. So my name is Glenn Katz, and currently I'm the Chief Commercial Officer for Telesat, which is a Canadian company that's been around for about 52 years, trying to connect the world, if you will. I would suggest maybe that I'll stand back a bit in the sense of representing Telesat, because this is really not a forum for me to express what we're doing to try to sell what we do. But I think as a representative of the satellite industry, I think that's important, because satellites, the current technology, some people know it as geostationary satellites, have been around for 50 years at least, as Telesat represents. So one would think that, well, where's the problem? If satellites cover the entire globe, why isn't everybody connected? Well, there's two fundamental reasons for that. And then I'll explain a little bit as to what the satellite industry is doing and how we're sort of revolutionizing things collectively, a few players. The geostationary satellites had a role to play, but when you need the amount of bandwidth that Bernadette and Bert are talking about in terms of coverage for 4G, even 5G, 6G, geostationary satellites, technically the amount of capacity that's available is not enough to be able to cover the entire world, even if there was limited, infinite amount of money. Because so there's two challenges to how you actually get universal access. One is funding, obviously, and the other is technology. And prior to working for Telesat, I worked in the telecom industry. I worked for Comcast, the United States, which is probably the world's largest ISP, right? But they're a business. And so when the money runs out, when it costs too much money to run a fiber backhaul to a tower somewhere, including in the United States, they stop. It makes no sense unless someone else is going to come in and fund that. But even with all of that, even if there was enough money for Comcast, a Comcast or an Orange or a large PTT will not build out because it's economically, it's not feasible or practical to get a fiber cable over a mountain to a village, as an example, where you need these types of services. That's where satellite comes in. Historically, we've been able to fill a certain gap. What's happening now in the industry, and I'll spend 10, 15 seconds on it, and then we can continue on, is a push for what's called low Earth orbit satellites.
Yes.
For satellites that can cover the entire world, the entire globe, 100%, with much more capacity and at a lower cost per bit, if you want to think about that. And so, for instance, for a mobile operator to be able to provide, or even as a requirement by a government to provide universal access in a village or someplace that's really hard to access, well, the new technology that's coming out there now and will continue to come out, Starlink, Elon Musk, Jeff Bezos, Telesat, OneWeb, a few other companies, we will be able to cover the entire globe, and the amount of capacity that's going to be introduced in the next 5 to 10 years from the satellite industry is enough, if you ask me, to provide the universal access if, to Bernadette's point, there's a will of other countries to do what's necessary. So I'll stop there.
Fantastic, thanks, Glenn. And with that idea that there isn't going to be, in theory, enough access, I'd like to bring in Eleanor Sarpong from the Alliance for Affordable Access at this point, just to understand from your perspective where we stand at the moment and where you want to get to.
Yeah, thanks, Alex. So we actually the Alliance for Affordable Internet, and we are hosted at the Worldwide Web Foundation, which is the foundation started by Simti Billingsley and his wife Rosemary Lee. So we are the leading advocate for affordable and meaningful broadband around the world. And it's exciting to hear everyone talking about, the need to have access in many places, universal access. Glenn has started talking about the types of technology. Bert was very candid about, the digital divide. And Bernadette also talked about the universal, the human rights aspects that you need to have access as a basic right. So for me, I want to look at meaningful universal access. And it's not just any access that's going to do. And this is something that we have been championing at A4AI for some time. Most people know us for affordability. We were the ones who championed for the 1 for 2 affordability targets, which now became adopted by the UN Broadband Commission, which says that, look, if you're spending more than 2% of your average monthly income on 1 gigabit of data, it means it's not affordable. We've moved the notch a little higher now, and we've been pushing for meaningful connectivity, which measures the quality that a person has, the quality of connectivity a person has along 4 key dimensions. We look at it in terms of speed. You should have at least a 4G type speed. So here we are talking about 6G, and in this world, we're saying at least a 4G type speed to start as an entry level. You should have at least a smartphone as a basic entry level. You should have unlimited data. And you should also be able to have data at all times in all places. I mean, it's important we came out with this ability to measure meaningful connectivity in the sense, because we are seeing that there's a lot of conversation about connectivity, about access, but sometimes the quality of that access and how affordable that access is very critical. And so I would like to move the needle a bit higher and say we should talk about meaningful universal access. And that's because we've come out with a new kind of, theory that we are saying, we're looking at meaningful access in 3 ways. First, it has to be affordable. Secondly, it has to have meaningful connectivity. And then thirdly, it has to have the social environment that supports digital skills, the trust element to ensure that people are safe when they're using the services, and also in relevant content and in a language that people understand. And I think the ability to push that will get governments to start seeing that even when they look at their national broadband policies that they're developing, they have to make sure that it's not just any targets that they're putting in are looking at some of these meaningful access, universal access theories that we are proposing, and are also challenging the targets that they're putting up to ensure that it is not just ability to access or have 75% of your population having some kind of access or coverage that matters. What matters is whether it is meaningful and whether they can use it in a way that can transform their lives. So I'm here to offer this challenge, and I think that it's one that we should be pushing governments to be able to adopt.
That's great. And something that ties all of this together, it seems to me, is finding the business model. Now, I mean, Glenn, you touched upon this in the sense that if we're able to make that connectivity much more affordable through the use of LEO sats, for example, then much else follows from that in the sense that it creates the right kind of price level, I would guess, for both telcos and for the end consumers. But that's going to need some pretty joined up thinking and quite a bit of a push, I would think. So let me sort of turn back to Bernadette and Bert maybe, and sort of ask whether you see the need for different kinds of enabling environments in terms of the policy or the regulation in order to support maybe these people who are falling on the wrong side of the digital divide, whether that's in advanced markets or places with little in the way of existing coverage.
Right. So if I go back to the title for this session, the problem of universal access, who needs to act? And my short answer is everyone. And it is my view that, achieving universal access is a collective responsibility with many diverse players, as someone used the term, joined up, filling the gaps. And everyone has a role to play. And I want to start with the governments. By their policy directives, they should ensure that that right to communicate is available to all, and access, as I think I think Glenn said that, it requires infrastructure. And we hear a lot about public-private partnerships, but I think we need to explore other sorts of collaboration between non-traditional partners. Have you ever heard of a civil society private partnership? Cooperatives could work with technology providers. In Canada, there are examples of cooperative communities that provided labor and some infrastructure to ensure that their communities had access to broadband. In the Caribbean, credit unions have very large financial reserves. And given their sort of social corporate responsibility, has anyone thought of engaging them and encouraging them to invest in broadband? Access requires energy, and so many of the Commonwealth countries, you have issues of electricity and electrification and energy to power the technology. Can there be partnerships, or can we foster those sort of very, very close working collaborations between power and ICT service providers? And I go back to the other question, meaningful access requires skills. We've heard it, the whole issue of education and digital literacy. What are you going to use the technology for? Civil society can also contribute to this. I've seen examples of faith-based organizations and community centers having developed school or homework centers for teaching digital skills, and they've had good success. So I really feel that we have to think outside of the framework of what we used to do and explore how we could engage or throw a wider net to bring people together to fill those gaps. And then the whole issue of the LEOs and the MEOs and collaboration with terrestrial service providers. These are things that need to be actively explored and not discounted. And, and we have to encourage local communities to think about what they need and to educate them as well and raise awareness of the possibilities. And I really think the notion of raising public awareness is an essential first step in bringing on as many players as can contribute to this process. We have to do more, we have to do better in terms of raising the awareness of the issues and the possibilities for a digital future.
That's very striking, Bernadette. And it's going to be hard to follow that, but I am going to say, particularly on that question of digital skills, that raises so many questions. I heard not many years ago a conversation with a telecoms provider in Bangladesh who had tried to encourage the use of internet services and data, but out there, thanks to Facebook's internet.org, a lot of the people who are resistant to using the internet and data did so because they thought that Facebook was the internet and they couldn't see much value in it. So this idea of the education, the skills, and so on is definitely a very big one. And I wonder, sort of turning to Bert and Eleanor on this, you know, whether you've encountered these kinds of problems when you're you know, speaking to either your sort of countrymen, your constituents, and whether you see any opportunities to sort of overcome these, other than, you know, just putting a lot of hard graft in, I guess.
Yeah, thank you, Alex. When you started speaking and you talked about Bangladesh, I just smiled because I just came back from Bangladesh a week ago, and we went to run our first our A4AI Bangladesh coalition. And coincidentally, you know, Bangla is the mainly spoken language. Even though most people can speak English, they prefer to express themselves in Bangla. And so what I found very interesting is that, yes, we run our meetings simultaneously in Bangla and in English. And then, of course, I can speak Bangla, so I have to find ways of making sure that I can pick the right, maybe use Google Translate or get someone to translate and so I can understand. But the reason why I bring this up is because I visited a hub which is run by a fantastic lady. It's Women in Digital. And it's got all these women engineers and developers that are working with clients in other parts of the world. A lot of their clients are in the West. And they have to, even though they speak in Bangla, they have to work in English. So one of the things I asked them was how they were able to ensure that they could do the right translations and ensure that their clients were satisfied. And they talked about they had developed this, they have this kind of software that they're using. And then also they have another thing called, I think, Google Keyboard that they mentioned that helps them. So not Google Translate, this is a different setup. But this just goes to show the importance of having relevant content and digital skills, because these ladies had to be trained in a language that they were very comfortable in, and also one that they could work very easily in and be able to also, you know, serve clients that were global. And so the other thing was a conversation about what you talked about, some of these walled gardens or entry-level ways, social media as an entry level to get into access to the internet. And you're right, a lot of people think that you know, social media, Facebook is the internet. And in the partly, it's the government has been encouraging that as a way to get people to get onto the internet as a baseline, and then hopefully they can migrate to the wider internet. But the sad thing is that most people just started there and have not moved on. And so I think that what is important is how we are able to have incentives in place and also help to develop relevant content. And I think that Bernadette is right. We need to work very closely with civil society organizations. There are a lot of NGOs that are working on content, and there are a lot of social entrepreneurs as well that need to be encouraged. Not just those startups in Silicon Valley. There are a lot of startups who are working on some of these content and local language, their local language developers that need to be encouraged and see how their systems can also be migrated onto the bigger platforms, so that they can be more relevant to the customers and the locals in various countries as well. So we are not just talking about access, but we also need to talk about meaningful use of that access.
That's very fair. And I mean, when we're talking about access and meaningful use, I mean, it is striking. You're quite right. It's definitely a problem that needs to be addressed in many countries where we don't have necessarily the coverage or the quality of service. And at the same time, you know, Bert, you're sort of based in Western Europe, and you know, there's still this question of you know, universal access and enablement, and it'd be good to understand from your perspective how much of this that we're talking about now rings true with you, from your own perspectives, and you know, what you're seeing from the ACM or the BEREC point of view that that you're doing that can contribute towards the solution.
Alex, as a regulator, we have an executive role. We enforce rules made by ministries. Our powers are limited by that, and our hands are itching. We study, of course. Recently, we have studied the digital divide among Europe and the European countries. What different member states are doing. I think we focused on 8 countries within Europe, and I think awareness is growing that we should not leave anyone behind. At the moment, our biggest instrument is keeping the cost of telecom low by reducing, regulation where possible. And I think if we talk about rolling out 6G, we should start with, a proper assignment or allocation of the spectrum, so that money is left for rolling out a network. 6G is supposed to be energy efficient. I don't know how they're going to do it, but that it's really required, because I think it eats a lot of energy. There should be network sharing, because if you have, in underserved areas, you don't want 3 competing operators. One is enough. It can be regulated. There can be price maximization. So let either one of the operators roll out to 100% area, or let them share their network, each other's network. So I think their regulators can play a big role, and that is also what we focus on in 5G. ACM has last year published a report how it is possible within the regulatory boundaries to do network sharing. It also has BEREC's attention. This is really where telecommunication and competition law come together. I think as a regulator, there we can act, and we have strong links to governments, of course, and we keep feeding them with our experience of the market. And one more thing, I helped my neighbor with filling in her forms online. That is, I think, all I can do as a person, because once a colleague said it's the elderly people who are left behind, but I think it's not only the elderly, or that group is even growing, because the technological developments are growing faster than people. So the group that is lagging behind with digital skills will only grow. So we should keep helping each other, and also this will help the elderlies out of their, isolated position in society.
Yeah. Alex, can I make a point as well? Just because Bert mentioned, I also wanted, when I looked at this topic, it talked about accessibility. And I think one group of people that we need to always think about is people with disabilities when we are developing. A lot of the technologies today have, it's improving, but it's not at the point where they can also, persons with disability can also enjoy the kind of meaningful use of the platforms and technologies that we are developing. So I'm hoping that as we look to 6G and all its use cases, we would be able to ensure that persons with disabilities are not just catered for, but also encouraged to co-create, with us on how things will look like, how the use cases will look like. And I just remembered that when we were at Bangladesh, there was one panel that had a person with who was blind, and he talked about the fact that a lot of the payment systems, the digital payment systems that he had come across in his country, did not have any support for people who were blind. And so he felt that that was a huge disincentive to be able to use digital payments. And I think that we need to start thinking about as we go into 6G and other technologies, we need to look at how to ensure that we're not leaving a lot of rural folks behind, elderly folks behind, persons with disabilities behind, people who speak different languages other than English behind, because there's a huge demand to develop in other languages as well, and also just ensuring that it's a technology that is very inclusive and can be well used.
That's a really good point. Thanks, Eleanor. Now I'm sort of watching Glenn here taking some careful notes, and I can't help but worry for him, because Glenn, Chief Commercial Officer here, he's going to be sort of wondering, how this all adds up in terms of the finances and so on. So, I mean, Glenn, it'd be good to get some of your thoughts here about, if we're moving to an environment where there is this much greater demand for universal connectivity, access, and so on. But at the same time, clearly, as we've heard from Bert, a push to keep the cost for the end consumer as low as possible. How do you see that working out? I mean, are there opportunities, do you think, for you in terms of your relations with, let's say, the existing terrestrial providers, or what comes?
Well, that's it. Alex, I'm glad you asked that, because I did want to sort of speak to that. And I write notes actually just so I can remember things. I rarely go back and look at them, but there's such wonderful, I don't want to use the term use cases, but information that I didn't know prior to this call from everyone, from Bernadette and Eleanor and Bert, that I actually am going to look at this further, the whole universal access ecosystem, because, in the commercial side, you don't necessarily look at it the way everyone else on this panel is looking at it. But what at least I can add is that the technology that's available today, whether it's 4G or 5G, as well as what will move to 6G, and then the ability, like I mentioned earlier, of satellite companies to be able to provide global infrastructure, orders of magnitude better in terms of, let's say, cost as well as capacity than what currently exists. It's still not to the level where, even if there was universal translation of applications that we all use that could go out there easily, it's still not that cost effective. It still requires governments to help fund. It still requires this public-private type of enterprise. And I can give you an example that's really relevant to Telesat. To build just our network, and now I'm talking about the first phase of our network that will provide global capacity that can continue to grow, it's a $6 billion project. And we don't have $6 billion ourselves to do that, even though we do like what the potential payback of that project will be. So we worked with the Canadian government, and the Canadian government, both the federal government of Canada as well as Quebec and Ontario, are large investors, if you want to think of it, and I use that term. They're investors in this new network, which we happen to call Lightspeed. And as part of that, and part of the rationale for that, is to be able to then utilize capacity exclusive to the Canadian government to provide universal access to all of the areas of Canada where you don't have that today, right? Canada is a country, there's other countries that are unique, where 95% of the population sits along the border with the United States. And there's really good coverage in that area. But then you have the other 5% of the Canadians that are spread out in a very vast geographical area. Australia is similar, Africa is very similar. So we as a private enterprise or a commercial enterprise still needs to be able, we still need to work with governments to be able to help us get our infrastructure out to then be able to enable all of the other aspects of universal access that we've been speaking about here today. So I think it's a great model, the Canadian model. I don't know if if you can recreate that in every country, but it is certainly something that's required, I would say, not just important.
Thanks, Glenn. I saw quite a lot of nodding along there from some of the other panelists. So I think there are some really good points there. I guess to turn it around slightly, I mean, we know that there are always going to be some people who just don't have the money to spend on connectivity. I mean, here in the UK at the moment, even though it's supposedly a very rich country, there's a huge cost of living crisis going on, and a lot of people making calls about, for example, whether to eat or pay their energy bills. It's not hard to imagine that there's always going to be a percentage of people who need some kind of support in order to get this access. So, I mean, my question is, and this is maybe one for the group, what ways you consider to be necessary or appropriate in order to help this segment of the population? I mean, are we sort of going back a decade and looking at the sort of one laptop per child programs that were rolled out in Africa to not a great deal of impact, I don't think. Sorry, Bernadette.
Yes, I just have to laugh at the one laptop. They gave the laptops and there was nothing else to accompany. There wasn't an ecosystem for the laptops. So what did the children end up doing? Looking at porn, this sort of thing. No framework for repair, no framework for teaching, no framework for instruction, nothing. So that's the reason for my smile. But I want to say that the government is a unique institution in that it is the only institution with which a citizen has to interact at every phase of life, from birth, the registration of the birth, the health, education, business, taxes, and so on. So it puts the government in a unique position to reach out to and know its citizens. And I think that has to be the driving force for governments to embrace the technology, to be early adopters of the technology, and to use it to deliver the services to its citizens. And this requires access. And Eleanor spoke a little earlier about content. The government is a great place to start. The government is a repository for information upon information. It's a great place to start. And if it could use the technology to deliver the services to its citizens, and the citizens are literate, they have that meaningful access, I believe that is going to catalyze widespread adoption. And I think it will be a demonstration to the private sector, because in many countries, the private sector is really waiting to see what the government is going to do, right? It is a demonstration of their commitment to the effective adoption of technology. And I think that is a must, a good starting place to really reach all of your citizens and provide the social services, even the social services that you're talking about. People, not just the you will talk to the technology providers about the underserved areas, but the people who cannot afford these services. And I'm not going to put the whole onus on the government at all. I believe that communities must seek to help themselves as well, right? And that is how you grow, rather than waiting for things to be just dished out. And we have to sort of inculcate that spirit of let's try, let's at least attempt this, let's try something different. Because if we keep doing the same things over and over and over, we're not, and expecting different results, as they say, that is a sign of madness. But so that is just what I wanted to say. And it's really, at the end of the day, it's not so much about the technology. Yes, you need the technology, but it's about changing mindsets. Yes, and having people to buy into and embrace and have hope for a different kind of future.
That's a nice point, Bernadette. And so, you'd be sort of trying to encourage communities to help with that universal adoption. How does that tie in with maybe your experience, Eleanor, sort of on the ground?
Yeah, so I was just nodding my head when Bernadette was speaking. The thing about helping, making social interventions, government has a very big role to play. In fact, that is why at Alliance for Affordable Internet, we work very closely with a number of governments in what we call the National Coalition format, where we are invited by governments. We form a coalition of civil society, private sector, and governments, academia, in a space where we look at policies that are needed to advance affordable and meaningful connectivity in the country. So we worked with the government of Nigeria on their national broadband plan, which is up to 2025. We work with the government of Liberia on the ICT policy. We are working with the government of Bangladesh on a broadband policy, which is taken off this year. And of course, in Guatemala, infrastructure sharing. So we do identify the various areas where we need policy reform. Governments have a very big role to play in this space. Governments can set once they can support a national policy, investors follow, because they know where your vision is and they know where they can you put their money. And they also know how serious you are as a country to be able to turn a profit or to be able to see what the use cases of their investments will be. So that's why governments need to set a very big and important role in having either an infrastructure policy, spectrum policy that are current and up to date and also forward looking. And I know that Berit is here because there's a lot that we can also learn from what Berit is doing. But the other thing too I want to speak about is whatever you do, you can't have 100% everyone being able to afford a smartphone device or affordability, and also even being able to get the kind of connectivity you need. So you need to also look at public access solutions, libraries, places where people can also go in. And I know in the UK, because I live in the UK, you can go to the library in a borough and you can get at least 1 hour of internet service free. So you don't need to own the laptop or the computer. You can just walk into a library and you get that. You can go to cafes. So I think we need to look at some of those public access solutions and offer incentives to a lot of companies. There are times where, as regulators, we just have to step in and make sure that those license obligations are met. Because if you leave it to the private sector alone, they'll still go where it's commercially viable. So you also need to make sure that there's a carrot and stick approach. And then what are we doing with our investor service funds? We are collecting a lot of money into those pots of funds, and some of those funds are sitting unused. So we need to make sure that those funds are dispersed for the right things and not for pet projects, but actually to support connectivity projects, to support relevant content delivery, to support supporting devices for a lot of communities. And so we need to really talk about the role of universal service funds and how that can augment some of the infrastructure gaps we see as well.
Yeah, that's lovely. And I mean, Bert, I know Eleanor's mentioned regulation and particularly your role quite a few times. And I'd like to just check with you, how true you think her statements are, or whether there's anything you'd like to respond to. And also, I guess maybe sort of get a sense from your personal wish list, whether there are elements as a regulator that currently you can't address or are not within your remit, but which, given the opportunity, you would sort of see changed or be able to tackle.
I was afraid that question was coming. As I described earlier, I'm in a country with a luxurious position. I think our universal services regulation is not even effective because it's not required. So I wouldn't even know the exact rules in place, and we're not working with them. I know that a long time ago, the incumbent operator had to connect every household with a copper wire. Later on, it said fiber is good as well, any technologically neutral solution would be fine. I think that makes sense as long as people have access to the digital world. It doesn't matter if it is fixed or mobile. There should still be such regulation in place, but I don't think it's addressing much of an issue in Netherlands. And I'm not very sure about the rest of Europe. I think it is probably it's different in other countries. But I don't know if those funds are unused, or I think it's probably also something up to the ministry how to distribute those funds. As a regulator, we try to keep the cost low and regulate where it is too expensive, and we can't address income issues. If incomes are too low, it's not up to the telecom regulator. But in Holland, I see local initiatives of municipalities providing free laptops, like you mentioned, in the school of my kids. Some kids get free laptops. Yes, we have libraries here with free internet. I make use of it when my printer is broke. So all those facilities are there, but not all through telecom regulation.
That's fair. And I mean, Glenn, again, to sort of go back to a little of what Eleanor mentioned there, she was talking about working with governments in order to develop the universal access and coverage and so on. Now, clearly coming from Telesat, it's a very different kind of collaborating with governments and with let's say the national telcos, but presumably there is still an element of that, very much as you've explained in Canada. I'd be interested to get a sense from you, how diverse it is in terms of the willingness of governments to engage, and whether that makes a difference to the business models or price levels that you're able to help bring about in those different countries.
Absolutely. I mean, it's really important, and the model has changed a little bit. I mean, the satellite industry, and I was part of it for many, many years before I went off into the terrestrial world, always utilized universal service fund projects for rural telephony. This problem has existed forever. But what's interesting about what's happening, what I see happening now, is those were specific for one project, one technology, you put it in and you walk away. The model that's I find very interesting here with Telesat and the Canadian government is they're investors in Telesat. They haven't said, we're going to give you a bunch of money, you just put in your infrastructure and walk away. They are now linked to the success of Telesat overall for their investment as an investor, as opposed to a private company that wants our services. They get investment rates, if you will. In other words, very low rates that we would say are subsidized, and they really are. To be able to then turn, there's some questions about the affordability of LEO as an example. Well, just as a commercial entity, the market sets the price, and someone said, commercial company is going to go wherever the market is. Well, the government here has turned that on its head. And we're an investor in you. We require this type of cost or price from you so that we can provide through you the services that we need for our constituents. And what does that mean? Every country can't launch their own low Earth orbit satellites as an example, but every country can work with their own what's regional telco or regional satellite operator to work with some of us that are providing global infrastructure for a similar type of investment model. And I think that changes the entire dynamics of how you can get the cost correct to be able to provide the infrastructure. And then of course you've got everything else we spoke about here, which is fascinating.
Yeah, absolutely agreed. And I'm aware that there are quite a few questions that have come in. I particularly like to thank Mitch Seng for his contributions here. I think we've kind of touched upon some of these already. and I realise we're getting quite close up to time. What I'd like to do is probably sort of follow up with some of those offline, but just before we wrap up, I'd like to sort of turn to each of you in turn and ask whether there are any particular aims or desires in order to achieve this kind of universal access that nations claim that they want from 6G. From your positions, what are the most important things that need to be done in order to see this happen? And Bernadette, simply because you never seem to be short on views, I'll turn to you first, and then work our way through.
Well, speaking from the perspective of what the CTO, the Commonwealth Telecommunications Organization, is trying to do, one of the three pillars is affordable universal access. And we will be reaching out, as Glenn rightly said, to the LEOs and the MEOs. They are going to provide the coverage, not with the challenges, the technical challenges of that the geostationary the satellite technology would have. And it's a tremendous opportunity. So I think we have to do a lot of public awareness and education of our policymakers, of what the implications are for the emergence of these new types of technologies. And we are talking, when you talk about the Commonwealth, you're talking about small island developing states in the Pacific, vast continental land masses with rural communities, all, just remote, the Guyanas in the Caribbean states. These are the Commonwealth countries. And we have to engage these new technologies that are coming on the fore and creating the opportunity for the partnerships that are necessary to close the gaps Glenn referred to very early in the conversation. So we are very much focused on making sure every citizen has that meaningful access to broadband. It's a life, it's a game changer. And as I said at the start, it is a right. Yes, thank you.
Excellent, thanks. And Glenn, if I can turn to you about, to see what your requests would be following on from this.
Well, it's this whole sort of aspect is new to me in terms of actually being in a company where the government is helping to fund your advancement. And I think that we as an industry can learn from that. Talking for myself and other respective companies, need to do a better job at actually working with governments and the particular areas of government that have the same exact goals as everyone that's been speaking here today, to come up with what's a better model, because the model that had been currently used for the previous 30, 40, 50 years has not solved the problem, right? So I don't have all the answers, but I'm encouraged, not just by what I hear here, but also some of the things I'm starting to see. And we're having discussions with other governments and other satellite operators in other areas of the world in a similar type of fashion. What kind of model can we put together that advances the goals of universal access better than it has been before?
Excellent, thanks, Glenn. Bert, over to you, and then I'll turn to Eleanor for some final words. Oh, sorry, Bert, you're still muted.
I'm a strong believer in competition, and I think as long as we keep the costs minimal, competition will drive investment and cover most of the country. And if there's still any market failure left that cannot be addressed with regulation, then government should step in with state aid or other facilities, because no one should be left behind.
Excellent, thanks, Bert. And Eleanor, over to you.
Yeah, and just adding on, I feel that going back to the national policies that are being developed by countries is so critical. I can't stress this enough. A lot of policy documents, national policies that should look which we're looking at broadband connectivity and our areas are out of date. And so we need to really work very closely with governments and policymakers to ensure that these documents are updated and, you know, have ambitious targets that will make, you know, investment more possible. I also think that we need to look at new ways of investment. And I love the fact that Glenn talked about the government investing, or municipal governments looking at themselves as investors. You know, I think that is a very good way to look at it and come up with a model that works. Whatever we do, unserved and underserved areas have people with low income. You're often in geographies that are very, very difficult. So you might not be able to get the kind of returns that you get in an urban area. And I think that once we accept that, then we can come up with models that work, that make it attractive to be able to ensure that everybody has universal coverage, and not just that, but meaningful access, affordable, meaningful connectivity, and with the kind of social environment that supports digital skills and content delivery.
Brilliant. Thanks ever so much, Eleanor. And with that, I see that we're up to time. So I'd like to thank Bert, Bernadette, Glenn, and Eleanor for all of their insights here. It's been absolutely fascinating, and I wish we had more time to dig into this. And I'd also like to thank you out there in the audience for all of your questions and comments and insights. The recording of this will be made available on 6G World on the 6G Symposium site from next week. So please do drop in for any recaps or refreshments that you need. And thank you very much, everybody. Bye-bye.